People say it all the time. You've probably even said it. There's even a song about it. You drive me crazy. Have you ever been to that point? Well, welcome back to Tech Reality. We're going to explore this today. So, what does you drive me crazy actually mean? This is certainly not a medical diagnosis. Nobody is opening a psychology textbook when they say it. What they mean is something closer to the breaking point. That moment when pressure builds, stress stacks up, and your thinking starts to maybe bend a little bit. Maybe not quite snap, but let's just call it a bend. Most of us have felt this edge. You're overwhelmed, something isn't going right, you make bad decisions. Bad decisions get bigger and bigger. Or as we saw during COVID, other people were making extremely bad decisions and they mounted and mounted and mounted until it was just quite honestly safer to stay in your home just to avoid the craziness outside. And sometimes things are said that are regretted or actions are taken that we wouldn't normally do. Some of us wake up, snap out of it, step back and think. And many of us will say, what were we thinking? Usually the consequences are actually small. A bad argument, a poor decision, a mistake at work, dropping a glass on the floor. But sometimes the consequences end up in the news. And this is why I want to talk about this today. 8 minutes ago, a story was released by Fox News, and it struck me as very odd. 8 days ago, a story came out of Idaho. And it made a lot of people pause and asked exactly the same question. What was that person thinking? Now, according to investigators, a woman in Meridian, Idaho, allegedly stole an ambulance, loaded it with gas cans, and parked it outside of a location to bring inside the location. So let's pull up the story. Let me share this with you before I go on further. Oops, let's see here. And okay. Okay, share this screen. Here we go. Okay, so this is what I wanted to show. Idaho woman accused of attempting to set fire to a DHS building with stolen ambulance. There's quite a few points in there that make you want to think, really? At what point did this become a good decision? Now, I don't want to harp on the individuals, so I'm going to move forward here, but there's some things that stood out for me. So I wanted to get right down here to this paragraph. This is Fox News. It says authorities identified this person after what a Meridian police chief described as 5 days of good old-fashioned police work, including canvassing businesses for surveillance footage and tracking vehicle records. 5 days? Seriously? Somebody stole an ambulance, which would be immediately tracked because all those ambulances have a LoJack on them. It parked itself inside of a U.S. federal building, not to mention Department of Homeland Security. Are they making a mockery? And yet they needed 5 days of good old-fashioned police work by not a federal officer, but what looks like a local police chief? I mean, what is this? What country do we live in? It's absolutely just baffling to me, and it probably is to you. So what I wanted to do was look at this a little bit further. So police say the ambulance was taken from outside a hospital and it was driven across town to an office complex. Inside the building were federal offices connected to the Department of Homeland Security. Not a local mom and pop shop, but actually the agency that is supposed to be protecting you and I, safety on our soil. Police say, oh, when the ambulance reached the building, investigators say it didn't stop in the parking lot. It went through the front entrance. Vehicles smashed into the lobby of the building, according to reports. Gasoline had already been staged nearby. Authorities say fuel was poured inside the entrance area, an attempt to make it ignite. Then the suspect left. This makes it sound like just walked away. Just pause for a moment and imagine the chain of decisions required for something like this to happen. First, there's a thought process. The closest timestamp I saw was at 9:17 p.m. that the gasoline was acquired. The event happened after 11 p.m. There's at least a 90-minute window to think, let me rethink my strategy for my events this evening. But first, the fuel containers were acquired. They had to have been filled with gas, which often wakes people up because you smell it and it stinks. Then you move to the location that you're targeting. Steal an emergency vehicle, of course, because nobody would see that. Then you drive it across town and crash it into a building that houses federal offices. Again, I ask, is this a joke? This doesn't happen in 5 seconds. Every step in this process where a person could stop, turn around, and reconsider, but sometimes they just don't. I used to say that it's just the craziness and the faults of the government. But at what point are we responsible for our own actions? So, 5 days later, investigators arrested a suspect. The woman happened to be from Boise. What's interesting isn't the arrest, but it's how the police got there. When people imagine modern investigations, they picture satellites and supercomputers, artificial intelligence, scanning faces across the internet. The San Francisco police officer that I spoke to back in December notified me that they have a variety of tools, not only cameras throughout the city, but they use drones that fly above the buildings so that people don't even know or hear that they're there. And they can track patrons until they're into a safe area, so there's not any retaliation or other citizens involved. They have ways to put items down on the road that end up stopping a vehicle. There's a lot of low friction tools that can be used. But really, in an ambulance, nobody knew that it was stolen or where it was going. The police chief described the investigation in very simple terms. He said it came down to what he called he or she, I'm not positive, good old-fashioned police work. That's excellent. Very odd. Detectives started knocking on doors. They asked nearby businesses, hey, do you happen to have any surveillance cameras up that we can get footage of? Very odd. They gathered footage from different angles and began piecing the timeline together like a puzzle. As if DHS didn't have cameras showing who pulled the car inside the building. One camera apparently has video of someone purchasing the gasoline containers. Another camera captures those containers being filled at a gas station. Investigators trace the purchases through a loyalty card used during the transaction. Really? Are you going to worry about your perks at this moment? From there, the trail leads to a name. Really odd. It sounds almost too simple when you say it like that. But what it really reveals is the modern world we live in. This can go one of two directions. One, either that person truly did it and sincerely wanted to be caught, or two, there is mass manipulation going on in the background. 40 years ago, if someone committed a crime in the middle of the night, there might be no witnesses, no cameras, no digital records. Today, though, it's very, very different. Everybody has a camera on their person, and there's cameras, as we're learning about the flock cameras, on every street corner. There are cameras above gas pumps, cameras outside grocery stores, cameras at traffic lights, cameras inside businesses. Your purchases leave digital records. Your car might be recorded by its license plate reader. Your phone constantly communicates with nearby cell towers. In other words, modern life leaves footprints everywhere. So you may be thinking that you're alone, but the system is always watching you. And by this point, everybody knows that. Even children know they're being watched. The idea alone is enough to make some people uneasy. Think 1984, because the same technology that solves crimes also changes how we think and behave. And that leads to something deeper than just one strange story out of Idaho. Technology doesn't just record our actions, it influences them. Think about how much information flows through your mind every single day. News stories, social media posts, online arguments, video clips designed to provoke emotion. Algorithms feeding you more of whatever keeps you watching. Your brain is constantly being nudged and pushed and influenced. We like to think we're fully in control of our thoughts, thus our words and our actions. But the environment around us matters more than we realize. And sometimes the environment becomes strange in ways people don't even fully understand. Now, this might keep you on the edge of your seat, or you may have experienced it as well. Not too long ago, I was sitting with a group of people, other tech professionals, just a normal group. And yet one of the people talked about a very odd event that they had. Now, this was early in the 90s, like maybe it was 1990, 1991 is the time frame that they placed it. And they were driving at night, it was dark. And somehow they heard something odd, something that nudged them to drive off the road. They said that they started to hear this quite often. And often they would have to hold on very, very tight to that steering wheel to not lose control. You know, people started to laugh, but ears perked up because it sounded ridiculous. But then someone spoke up, and my ears perked. They said the same thing happened to them. Another person said the same. At the same point, the conversations got quiet and everybody focused on what was being said here. Because suddenly people in the room were describing the same strange experience. Well, I had experienced the same thing in 1990 and 1991 in the same part of the country. I remember being so afraid, holding on to the steering wheel with all I could and just praying that I could get out of there and get home. I didn't know where the voice was coming from, and I certainly didn't know what was going on with my car. And now people were saying that they experienced the same in the same region of the United States and in the same time frame. This was weird. So maybe there is a simple explanation. The human brain is very good at creating patterns, especially when we're tired or stressed. Our minds are constantly processing signals, and sometimes we can misinterpret them. But here's the interesting part. When those stories supposedly happened, again, it was the 1990s, 1991 at the latest. Back then, you didn't have a smartphone. There was no Google. There was no Waze. There was no voice in your car talking to you other than whatever was on the radio. There's no digital assistants talking through our speakers in our homes, no GPS navigation. Cars didn't steer themselves. Now, today, this would look very differently. If we heard a voice, we'd look at our phone, maybe even our cars. Hold on control. And with the autonomous vehicles, it can get very frightening very quick. But cars didn't steer themselves back then. Your phone talks to you. Your car may have a driver assistance that you can correct the steering, tap the steering wheel, pump the brake, hit the big red button if you're in an autonomous vehicle. Navigation software even tells you where to go, when to turn, and how fast traffic is moving. There are even systems that monitor driving behavior and send data back to manufacturers and insurance companies. Companies like Mobileye out of Israel get all that data. And they build technologies and track vehicle movement around it, analyzing road conditions and help guide cars through complex environments. In many modern vehicles, the machine isn't just observing the driver, it's actually participating. Sometimes it's correcting the driver. That's an extraordinary change in just 30 years, which brings us back to the Idaho story. Somewhere along the way, a person made a series of decisions that led to a stolen ambulance crashing into Department of Homeland Security federal building. The obvious reaction is to say the person must be crazy. But the word crazy doesn't really explain anything. It's just a label when we use behavior that just doesn't seem to make sense to us. What actually matters is the chain of events leading up to that moment. Psychologists sometimes talk about decision trees, the idea that every action creates a new branch of possible choices. At each step, a person can stop, change direction, or continue to move forward. When someone commits an extreme act, it's rarely one sudden decision. It's a path made up of smaller steps that eventually reach a point where turning back feels impossible. Adrenaline gets going, the blinders are on, there isn't a turning back point. And that path, I've got to say, cannot exist in a vacuum. It exists inside a technological environment that consistently feeds information into our minds. Call it news, politics, fear, outrage, rumors, speculation. Every one of those inputs shapes perception. Sometimes they push people toward rational thinking. Sometimes they push people toward something else entirely. Which is why stories like this one raise different questions. What exactly was going through someone's mind before the ambulance hit the building? Was it anger, ideology, isolation? Was it something that they read online, something they believed was happening in the world, perhaps something they had personally experienced? Or was it simply a long chain of decisions that slowly escalated until the situation crossed a line that can now never be uncrossed? Well, the truth is, no matter what legal evidence or police stories come out, we'll never truly know the truth. That's always hidden from us. The manipulation of propaganda will be launched, but we don't know the core truth. But what we do know is this: the modern world is not the same world that humans evolved in. We now live inside a constant stream of technology that records our lives, influences our thinking, and sometimes guides our actions in ways we barely notice. So the next time someone says, you're driving me crazy, maybe the more interesting question isn't whether someone is crazy at all. Maybe the real question is what pressures, influences, and systems are quietly shaping decisions we make every single day. Because once you start looking at the world that way, stories like this one in Idaho stop looking like random events. They start looking like the end of a very long chain of causes. And the uncomfortable truth is that those chains exist all around us, all the time. This has been Tech Reality. You're driving me crazy.